32,000 feet over the Zagros Mountains. Night 4. A B-2 Spirit banks left, its belly still warm from the last drop. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, call sign confirmed only as Ranger 2-1 in the after-action leak, watches a green pixel bloom on his screen. That pixel is a mountain. Inside that mountain is Fordow, and inside Fordow, allegedly, is the machinery that has kept the Middle East holding its breath for 20 years. He releases a GBU-57, 30,000 pounds of American steel and physics. And here's the part nobody in the cable news chyron mentioned. At the exact moment that bomb left the bay, in a reinforced basement 300 miles east of Tehran, a senior officer of Iran's Revolutionary Guard reportedly looked at his watch and smiled. That smile is what this video is about. For 4 nights straight, Donald Trump did what 3 American presidents before him refused to do. He hit Natanz. He hit Isfahan. He hit Fordow. He unloaded ordnance that had never been used in combat before, on targets that had been diplomatic third rails since the Bush administration. The Pentagon called it the most complex strike package since 2003. Fox called it decisive. MSNBC called it reckless. Both, for once, agreed on one thing, that America had just done something historic. But historic is not the same as smart. And somewhere in a windowless room at Langley, an analyst is looking at the same footage you saw on TV and asking a very different question. Not, did we hit them? We hit them. The craters are real. The question is colder than that. Did they let us? Because here's what didn't make the primetime cut. By night 2, Iran's air defenses, the S-300 batteries Russia sold them, the Bavar 373 systems Tehran spent a decade bragging about, went quiet. Not destroyed, quiet. Radars that had been tracking American aircraft for the first 8 hours simply stopped. The Pentagon logged it as suppression. A retired CENTCOM planner I spoke with used a different word. He called it an invitation. And there's more. 48 hours before the first bomb dropped, an intercepted phone call, the transcript now bouncing between 3 Senate offices, captured a senior Iranian official speaking to a counterpart in a country that is not Russia and not China, but sits between them on the map. What he said on that call had nothing to do with missiles. It had to do with oil futures, specifically when to buy them. Keep that call in your head. We're coming back to it. Because over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through 3 things. The architecture of the trap Iran may have spent 6 years building, the people who benefit if America gets pulled deeper in, and the 72-hour window starting now that decides whether Trump walked into that trap or through it. To understand why that silence on the radar matters, you have to go back 6 years. 6 years ago, in the summer of 2020, something strange started happening in Iraq. American bases, the small ones, the forward operating posts nobody outside the Pentagon could name, began getting hit by rockets. Not many. Not enough to make the evening news. 1 rocket here, 2 there, a mortar round that landed in a parking lot at Al-Assad, a Katyusha that missed a helicopter pad by 40 feet outside Erbil. If you were watching cable, you never heard about most of them. If you were watching CENTCOM's internal threat board, you saw a pattern forming. I want you to picture that board, because a former J2 intelligence officer described it to me, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every attack was plotted on a map of the region, then plotted again on a calendar, and then, this is the part that matters, plotted against a third axis. American political tempo, election cycles, sanction announcements, nuclear deal deadlines, cabinet reshuffles. The rockets weren't random, they were scored, like a piece of music. Here's what the curve looks like when you draw it. From 2020 to early 2023, the attacks are low frequency, low lethality, a slow drumbeat, just enough to keep American troops in defensive posture, just quiet enough that no president could justify a full response. Then, starting in mid-2023, the curve bends. Attacks get more precise. Drones replace rockets. American service members start dying. 1 in Jordan, 3 at Tower 22, a contractor in Syria. Each incident just barely under the political threshold that would force a war. And then, in the 90 days before Trump's 4th night over Fordow, that curve goes vertical. Not linear, vertical. Houthi missiles targeting U.S. destroyers in the Red Sea jump from a handful a month to nearly 1 a day. Iraqi militia strikes double, then triple. A drone hits an Israeli border town and kills 7. Another slams into a Saudi refinery. The pattern is so aggressive, so tightly clustered, that when a Rand Corporation analyst plotted it against every U.S. military response since Desert Storm, she found something disturbing. It matched, almost line for line, the escalation curve that preceded the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Except this time, the curve wasn't drawn by accident, and it wasn't drawn by us. Now, I want to be careful here, because you've heard the phrase false flag thrown around by every armchair analyst on the internet, and that is not what I'm describing. Nobody is saying Iran attacked itself. What the intelligence pattern suggests is subtler and, honestly, more terrifying. Iran engineered the conditions. It stacked provocations, one on top of the other, calibrated with the precision of a chess grandmaster, until an American president, any American president, but especially one whose brand is strength, would have no politically survivable option except to strike back hard. And Trump did exactly what the curve predicted he would do. He hit Natanz on night 1, Isfahan on night 2, Fordow on night 3, and on night 4, the night that has everyone confused, the night that had no clear strategic target left, he hit a secondary facility outside Iraq that most analysts didn't even know existed. Which raises the obvious question, who told him it existed? Because that intelligence didn't come from a satellite, it came from a source. And sources, in this part of the world, are almost never neutral. But bait only works if the trap has teeth, and Iran's teeth aren't in Iran. Pull up a map of the Middle East. Not the one they show you on the news with the little flags and the neat borders, the real one, the one intelligence officers actually use. On that map, there are no countries, there are nodes. A node in southern Lebanon called Hezbollah, 150,000 rockets aimed at northern Israel, most of them precision-guided, courtesy of Iranian engineers who spent the last decade upgrading them in mountain workshops the IDF cannot reach without a ground war. A node in western Yemen called the Houthis, sitting on top of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the throat of global shipping, with anti-ship missiles that can reach any hull passing between Africa and Arabia. A node in Iraq, spread across a dozen militia franchises, Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, the Popular Mobilization Forces, sitting inside artillery range of every American base still on Iraqi soil. A node in Syria, quieter now that Assad is gone, but not empty. Iranian Quds Force operatives dispersed into cells the Israelis have been hunting for 18 months without catching them all. And a node most people forget about entirely, in the western provinces of Afghanistan, where Iran spent 20 years cultivating Shia militias the Taliban tolerates because Tehran pays better than Kabul. Draw a line connecting those nodes. What do you get? You get a noose. Here is what nobody explained on cable news in the hours after the strikes. The U.S. intelligence community has been tracking every one of those cells for years. Names, phone numbers, safe houses, weapons caches. Some of them have been under continuous surveillance since 2019. And do you know what those agencies could legally do about them? Almost nothing. Because under U.S. law, and under the political reality of the last 4 administrations, you cannot conduct kinetic operations against a foreign network unless that network has attacked you first, or unless its parent state is in open hostilities with the United States. Iran was, technically, not in open hostilities with the United States until night 1 over Natanz. The moment those bombs dropped, a switch flipped inside CENTCOM, inside JSOC, inside Cyber Command. Cells that had been watched for years became cells that could now be hit. Target folders that had been gathering digital dust suddenly went active. Within 72 hours of the first strike, according to a Reuters report that got almost no traction, U.S. forces conducted more than 40 separate kinetic and cyber actions across 5 countries. Sounds like a win. Sounds like the machine was finally allowed to work. Except here's the thing about waking up a network that has been sleeping for a decade. You don't just wake up the parts you know about. Every intelligence officer I have ever spoken to says the same thing about the Iranian proxy web. For every cell they have identified, they estimate 2 more they haven't. The known nodes are the tip. The submerged mass is everything Tehran has been quietly building since the Soleimani assassination in 2020. The revenge architecture, the sleeper operatives, the pre-positioned weapons in places nobody is looking. The strikes didn't just give America permission to hit Iran's network. They gave Iran's network permission to hit America. And while the Pentagon was drawing up target packages, somebody else, somebody very far from the Middle East, was looking at a completely different screen. A screen with numbers on it. A screen that measured, in real time, the price of a single barrel of oil. Remember the phone call. The one I told you to keep in your head. The intercepted conversation, 48 hours before the first bomb dropped, between a senior Iranian official and a counterpart in a country that sits between Russia and China on the map. I want to tell you what was on that call. It wasn't about missiles. It wasn't about Fordo. It wasn't about how many centrifuges were still spinning at Natanz. According to two people who have seen the transcript, one a former Treasury official, one a Senate staffer with Intelligence Committee clearance, the Iranian official spent almost the entire call talking about one thing: timing. Specifically, the timing of certain sovereign wealth purchases of Brent crude futures. The kind of trade that only makes sense if you know, with absolute certainty, that the price of oil is about to move. And oil moves for exactly two reasons: supply shocks and war. Now, here is what happened in the 48 hours after that call and before Trump's first strike. Chinese state-linked funds increased their positioning in energy futures by an amount that Bloomberg terminals flagged as statistically abnormal. Russian Energy Ministry officials canceled scheduled travel. And a small group of sovereign traders operating out of a Gulf state that publicly condemned the strikes when they happened made what one commodities desk described to me as the trade of the decade. They didn't just profit from the war, they front-ran it, which means somebody knew. And that somebody wasn't in Washington. But this is where the story stops being about money and starts being about something much bigger. Because there is a reason the dollar is the world's reserve currency, and that reason has a name: the petrodollar. Since 1974, oil has been priced in dollars. Every barrel sold anywhere on Earth generates demand for U.S. currency. That single arrangement is the load-bearing wall of American economic power. It's why we can run the deficits we run. It's why our sanctions actually hurt. It's why the world still, grudgingly, listens when a U.S. Treasury Secretary speaks. And for the last decade, Beijing and Moscow have been building, quietly, patiently, brick by brick, an alternative. The yuan-denominated oil contract on the Shanghai Exchange, the ruble-yuan settlement mechanism, the BRICS payment infrastructure that most Americans have never heard of, all of it dormant, all of it waiting. Waiting for what exactly? Waiting for the moment the United States looks so entangled in another Middle East war that its economic credibility cracked just enough for the alternative to feel safe. 4 nights of bombing did not crack it. 4 nights of bombing put a hairline fracture in it. But if this escalates, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, if Hezbollah opens the northern front, if American body bags start coming home, that fracture becomes a fault line, and every barrel of oil that gets priced in yuan instead of dollars is a chip taken off the American table. The Iranian official on that phone call knew this. The counterpart on the other end knew this. And somewhere in a trading floor in Shanghai, an algorithm knew it before either of them said a word. Trump didn't just drop bombs on a nuclear program. He may have dropped them on the load-bearing wall of the dollar itself. Which raises the question nobody in Washington wants to answer out loud. If Iran wanted this, and China wanted this, and Russia wanted this, who in America wanted it too? There is a briefing room on the 3rd floor of the West Wing, windowless, soundproofed, the kind of room where a president's mind gets made up before he knows it's been made up for him. On the afternoon before Night 4, the night with no obvious target, the night that hit that facility outside Iraq, a small group walked into that room carrying a folder. Not the president's daily brief, a supplemental, a single-topic intelligence product prepared outside the normal interagency process, which in government speak means it skipped the people who might have said no. According to 2 sources who spoke to reporters at the Washington Post and Axios in the days after the strikes, that folder contained satellite imagery, human source reporting, and a recommendation. The recommendation was to extend the campaign by 1 more night. The rationale was that Iran was on the verge of dispersing critical materials, and this was the last window to hit them. Trump read it. Trump signed off. The B-2s launched 6 hours later. And here is the question that is now quietly ricocheting through the intelligence community. Who wrote that folder? I'm not going to give you names I cannot fully verify, but I can tell you the shape of who benefits, and you can draw your own conclusions. There is a wing of the American defense industry that has spent the last 3 years watching its share price drift sideways. Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop, the companies that build the exact ordnance being expended over Iranian airspace right now. Every GBU-57 costs the U.S. taxpayer roughly $3.5 million. In 4 nights, the Pentagon burned through more of them than were manufactured in all of 2023. Replacement contracts alone will run into the billions. Those contracts were not sitting in a drawer waiting. They were pre-negotiated. framework agreements signed months ago, which means somebody, somewhere, was planning for exactly this level of expenditure long before the first Iranian provocation escalated the curve. Then there is the political wing, a cluster of advisors inside Trump's own orbit, some familiar names from the first term, some newer, who have argued for years that a decisive strike on Iran is the one foreign policy move that unites the Republican base, splits the Democratic base, and locks in the 2026 midterms. That argument is not a conspiracy theory. It has been made openly, on podcasts, in op-eds, in Heritage Foundation white papers. The strikes are, for that faction, not a means to an end, they are the end. And then there is the quietest faction of all, the one you never see on cable, the old-line neoconservative apparatus that lost power in 2016, spent 8 years in exile, and has been slowly, methodically working its way back into the national security bureaucracy through second-tier appointments and think tank fellowships. For that faction, Iran has been the unfinished sentence of the Bush Doctrine for 22 years. Night 4 was not a mistake. Night 4 was a homecoming. So when the president signed that supplemental brief, he may have believed he was making a sovereign decision. In truth, 3 separate constellations of American interest had already aligned to make sure that particular folder reached his desk, at that particular hour, with that particular recommendation. The call, in other words, was coming from inside the House. Which does not mean Trump was wrong to strike. It does not mean Iran wasn't a genuine threat. Both things can be true. Iran can be a real menace, and America can still be maneuvered into a war that serves other people's interests before it serves its own. History is full of that exact shape. So what happens now, in the next 72 hours, decides whether we walked into a trap or through it. Everything I have told you so far is prologue. What happens next is the story. Because in the world of great power confrontation, the first move is loud and the second move is quiet. And it's the second move that decides who won. Trump made the loud move. Iran has not yet made the quiet one. When it does, it will not look like a war. It will look like 3 small, seemingly unconnected events. And I want to give you those 3 events now, so that when you see them on your phone this week, you will know exactly what you're looking at. Watch the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil passes through a corridor that, at its narrowest point, is 21 miles wide. Iran does not need to close it. Iran only needs to make one insurance underwriter in London decide it is too risky to write a policy on a tanker transiting it. If a single Iranian fast boat swarm harasses a Panamanian-flagged vessel, not sinks it, just harasses it, Lloyd's rates spike, shipping companies reroute around Africa, and the price of Brent crude jumps $18 a barrel by Friday. That is not a war. That is a phone call from a Lloyd's actuary. And it costs Iran nothing. Watch for the words shipping advisory on Bloomberg this week. If you see them, Tripwire 1 has fired. Watch northern Israel. Hezbollah has spent 18 years and roughly $1 billion of Iranian money preparing for exactly this moment. Its rocket inventory dwarfs anything the IDF has faced before. But Hezbollah's leadership is not stupid. It will not open the northern front with a barrage. It will open it with a probe. A single precision-guided missile aimed at a specific Israeli military asset, a radar site, a naval vessel, a command post, something that forces Israel to respond, but leaves Hezbollah room to claim the response was disproportionate. That probe will happen at night. It will happen on a weekend, and it will happen while American attention is somewhere else. If you wake up on a Sunday morning to a chyron reading, "Strike on Northern Israel," Tripwire 2 has fired. Watch American infrastructure. This is the one nobody in the mainstream press is warning you about, and it is the one that matters most. Iran's cyber capability has been quietly upgraded by Russian tradecraft for the last 6 years. Its target list, according to a CISA advisory issued 3 weeks before the strikes and almost entirely ignored, includes American water utilities, regional power grids, and municipal 911 systems. A cyber event on U.S. soil would not need to be catastrophic to be devastating. A single water treatment plant in a mid-sized American city going offline for 48 hours would do more to Trump politically than any missile Iran could fire. If you see a local news story this week, not national, local, about a utility outage with no known cause, pay attention. Tripwire 3 may have fired before Washington even names it. 3 tripwires. Any one of them on its own is manageable. Any 2 of them in the same 72 hours, and the escalation ladder Iran spent 6 years building starts to climb itself. Which brings us back to the smile. Go back to the room in the basement. 300 miles east of Tehran, Night 4. The senior officer of the Revolutionary Guard, the watch, the smile. I've had a lot of time to think about that smile since the first reports of it started circulating in intelligence circles, and I want to tell you what I think it means. Not what I know, what I think, because at this point in the story, honesty about the limits of what we can prove is more valuable than another confident claim. That officer was not smiling because Iran won. Iran did not win. Fordow is a crater. Natanz is rubble. Real Iranian scientists are dead. Real Iranian infrastructure is gone. Real capability has been set back by years. That damage is not theater. It is permanent. And any analyst who tells you Iran came out of those 4 nights stronger in absolute terms is either lying to you or selling you something. But absolute strength was never the game. The game was relative position, and in relative terms, Iran may have traded a nuclear program it could not fully protect for something more valuable: a wounded America, a fractured NATO consensus, a jittery global oil market, an activated proxy network, and a petrodollar with its first real hairline crack in 50 years. If those trades hold, the officer in that basement will have been right to smile. If they don't, if the tripwires stay quiet, if the strait stays open, if the grid stays on, then that smile was just a man in a bunker, whistling past a graveyard he already knew he was in. Which one is it? Nobody watching this video knows yet. Nobody in Langley knows yet. Nobody in Trump's own war room knows yet. The 72 hours I described in the last chapter are the answer key, and the test is being written in real time. Here is what I want you to take from all of this. The world you are living in right now is not the world of the 24-hour news cycle. It is not the world of the winning Chiron and the losing Chiron. It is a world in which 4 nights of American bombs can be simultaneously a military victory and a strategic trap. Both, at the same time, held in the same hand. That contradiction is uncomfortable. It does not fit on a graphic. It does not survive a cable news segment. But it is the actual shape of the crater we made this week. Not round, not clean. A crater with the outline of somebody else's plan drawn faintly around its edges. Whether Trump walked into that outline or straight through it and out the other side is the story the next 3 days will tell. So here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to answer it in the comments because I read them, and this one matters. If you had been the one holding the pen on night 4, knowing what you know now, seeing the curve, hearing the phone call, understanding the trap, would you have signed the order? Would you have hit a rock? Or would you have walked away and let Tehran wonder why the 4th bomb never came? Tell me. I'll be reading.